There we go. So, all right, letter 7. Letter 7 is up. This was, I think, a great letter, and I think probably the most of all the 31 letters. I think the one that really hits me the most, because it's one of those things where the devil, to intend the phrase, he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't, in the sense that he does not want to be seen. He wants to be hidden, but yet part of the satisfaction is revealing himself and saying, ha ha, look what I did, that kind of thing, right? He can't help himself. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind. And so anybody have any thoughts, comments as they read the letter? What advantages do devils gain by making their presence known?
Can incite more fear.
Right. Incite more fear. Get in our heads in many ways. You know, the devil loves it when we're afraid of him. What else? Right. I love this line. Our policy for the moment is to conceal ourselves. Of course, this has not always been so. We are really faced with a cruel dilemma. When the humans disbelieve in our existence, we lose all pleasing results of direct terrorism, and we make no magicians. On the other hand, when they believe in us, we cannot make the materialists and skeptics. At least not yet. You know. And so I think there's that, that battle, right? So yeah, illicit fear, an inordinate fear of the devil, where we have, to borrow from the Flip Wilson School of Theology, the devil made me do it. The devil's behind every nook and cranny. And so we become so devil obsessed, we lose sight of Christ. Not good. Then, of course, what advantages do devils gain by hiding their existence?
We let our guard down.
We let our guard down. We think the matter is really just a technocratic matter, a biological matter, whatever it might be. One of the fastest growing movements in science today, in neuroscience, you may have heard about this, and I actually will cover this I do cover it in my ethics class. There is no free will, because there's no soul. And so you have professors like Jerry Coyne and Jerry Krauss and all these people at Chicago and top level schools, right? So neurobiology, neuroscience, free will doesn't exist, because we're just material, and our wills are influenced by everything external to us. So if we shut the lights off, it's going to affect us, right? It's going to have an impact on us. And so we are being acted on. And so there's chemical reactions in the body. And so that's what you are. You're the sum total of your chemical reactions. And you are not free to make the decisions that you make. And it's out there. And that's what's very popular in many circles. Right?
I think also if a devil hides his existence and nobody ever really comes to believe in a devil, then they're going to be like, well, there's no devils, there's no angels, there's no God.
Right.
If there's no
right.
devil, there's no good. There's just nothing. It's just us.
Right. Exactly. It's just a material world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where materialism comes in. There's no transcendent world.
So if the devil exists, then God must exist.
Right.
Right.
And the devil does. Go back to the devil in the garden never actually told Adam and Eve, God doesn't exist.
Right.
He said, "Can you trust God?"
Right. Did God really say?
Yeah.
That's an excellent observation, Chris. That's an excellent observation. And of course, James 2, when he says, you believe in God, good. Even the devils believe and tremble. The devil is no atheist. In fact, he's number one in theology class. He wins Religion Student of the Year, right? He knows more about theology than we will ever know, right? But he certainly does not love God. He certainly does not have a heart for God. Think back to Paul VI. Remember when beginning mentioned in the preamble of the class, just kind of go background, Paul VI, and talking about Satan and how we don't hear any talk of Satan anymore because, we're refined people and we are people who have, degrees and we have science background. And he was talking about the need today more than ever to talk about the devil. And the European dailies, when he gave the speech, made fun of him, right? Mocked him. Like how could a man of such learning, believe in a devil? That kind of thing. It's only the Pope. He kind of believes in God, but we had moved so past that. And that's 50, 60 years ago as a culture, right? And yet what's amazing about that, you're on the heels of 2 world wars that killed how many? 100 million? When you factor in all the people that Stalin killed by his own hand, all the people Hitler killed by his own hand, not including the people that died in the war, not including the people that Mao killed by his own hand. Like just China, Germany, and the Soviet Union alone, you're looking at 75 million people dead, not even in combat. Just, we don't like you. You don't fit the regime. You're dead. That's why John Paul called the 20th century the bloodiest century in the history of humanity. And yet the whole thing starts out, everything's great, everything's wonderful, we're just getting to get better and better and better. And so we equate technological advancement with what? Moral advancement. And that's not true. So, any other thoughts, comments about that?
The comic idea, I feel like, is very prevalent in my culture, like my generation, where we just make it a joke about the devil and
Right.
church, and it's like, you're just superstitious, like a lot of my friends were like that. That was secular. It's like, oh, you believe that to comfort yourself, where the devil is just a joke, and I mean, it's sad because they use that as a block against art and artists.
Right, the comic figures.
Yeah, even like with shows and things.
Right.
Cutesy or even like sexy to be like. I see a lot of like even the obsession with like the occult now, where it's like fun, it's cool,
Cutting edge.
Yeah, it's art.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. Oh yeah. Art. Right. Seeing that. Some kind of neo-Gothic. Well, of course, it's not at all any of that, but yeah, just kind of what you were saying. The fact that devils are predominantly comic figures in the modern imagination will help you. If any faint suspicion of your existence begins to arise in his mind, suggest to him a picture of something in red tights. And persuade him that since he cannot believe in that, he therefore cannot believe in you. And also, of course, this idea of forces, the vague notion of forces, life force. Just above that, the worship of sex. Some aspects of psychoanalysis may here prove useful. The materialist magician. So, for example, that movie that we saw that was about the devil, Nefarious. Have you seen Nefarious, Father? You've heard of it, though, right? And it's really well done. And a man on death row And so the demon manifests himself on occasion, right? And so as he's basically, it's a last minute appeal, and not to ruin the story, it's worth I think it's worth seeing. And the parole board is meeting with him, and they're not really sure what to make of this guy, right? And so in the midst of the conversation, the devil just starts talking through him, right? And saying things. And you could see he gets contorted and all that. And then he kind of goes back to normal and all that. And so part of the last minute appeal, right? As he's getting ready, he's going to be going to the chair, I think, that night, right? Isn't it that night, Chris? So a priest is sent in, and he's told, look, a priest is going to come in, and to have a last minute clergy member to be with him, to pray with him, and to meet up with him. Well, when he hears word that a priest is coming in, the demon inside of him shrieks and is like, no, no, no priest, no priest. And so the priest comes in, and the body language is he's back, like he's like afraid. And the man himself is not, but the demon working in him is like, no. And then when he pulls out his stole, it's a rainbow stole. And immediately the demon relaxes and says, oh, I think we can be friends. And it was very profound. Father Patrick Gilbert said that was because that was the most haunting and his favorite part of the movie, because the demon knows. He knows, because even Hollywood knows. Like whenever they show some kind of exorcism, I mean, Steve Dace, who did this movie, is not a Catholic, but he didn't put some clergyman in there with a business suit on, walking, Joel Osteen type. He put a man in an alb and a stole, right? Even though it was a distorted stole, it still was a priest, and it was made clear, oh, this is a priest. It's Father so-and-so coming here. Because we all kind of know, like, there's something different, right? Catholic priests do something different. And so the priest, the demon lets his guard down and is at peace because, oh, he's not going to harm me. He can't do anything, right? And I thought of that when I read this psychoanalysis. Where it says the life force, the worship of sex, and some aspects of psychoanalysis may here prove useful.
So when we talk about magicians,
Mm-hmm.
what is that? Like, we can produce our perfect work, the materialist magician. I'm thinking materialist is like of the world,
Mm-hmm.
but the magician part,
Yeah, me too. I was like,
what is that? Because he referenced it earlier, saying we cannot and make no magicians. So what's the goal of making like, a magician? What's that?
I think the David Blaine types. I think the magic world, like like reducing everything to a trick of the eye, illusionists. They're really good at it.
So, like,
Because in the ancient world, right, we studied this with Brant Petrie, you had magicians, Simon Magus, who could trick you into thinking things and kind of that. So you're still in touch with the spirit world, but it's not a theistic spirit world. It's a strange neo-paganism spirit world.
which is popular.
Yes. Right. It's made a comeback in many ways. In many ways, also precisely because of the materialism of our day. So people are kind of wanting to get in touch with some kind of spiritual reality, but it's not necessarily a benevolent spiritual reality. And what about the next one? At At the time those letters were written, it was the policy of hell to keep demonic existence a secret. What do you think their policy would be at the present? I think in many ways we're seeing it, right? The culture of death is on display.
But they still hide it, like, because even abortion is hidden, like, as if it's the good for the woman,
Mhm.
helping her.
It's healthcare.
It's not like evil, it's good.
Right,
It's a good.
right, right. Then he kind of changes slightly. I had not forgotten my promise to consider whether we should make the patient an extreme patriot or an extreme pacifist. All extremes, except extreme devotion to the enemy, are to be encouraged. Not always, of course, but at this period. And so the idea of factions create division. Remember back to what Diabolos, right? He's a divider. He's the one who cuts through. Some ages are lukewarm and complacent. Then it is our business to soothe them, yet fast or asleep. Other ages, of which the present is one, are unbalanced and prone to faction. What do you think? What do you think he would say today? These things, look, I'm broadcasting on something that has people watching and whatnot, and we'll get, when sent out by email, to the email list, 40 or 50 people who are living online. I mean, who watch it online, phones, right? So we have been able to kind of balkanize ourselves off. We create our own playlists, right? Whatever. The algorithm follows what and it's nice, Our son is interested in, for some reason, the Chinese language. And so he's able to kind of get himself lost in a array of videos on how to speak Chinese and develop a love for the culture. I don't know what he's going to do with it. Maybe he'll become a missionary. I don't know. To China. Father McKenna always wanted to go to China. But you can do that, and that's cool and neat. But in other ways, in many ways, it creates a kind of factionalism too, right? Where everybody's kind of broken off, and we've lost out on a kind of unity, a shared culture. Archbishop Brody said that today in his homily, that in order for the republic to work, in order for a country to work, there has to be a shared value and a shared culture. Implication of his homily was we're increasingly moving away from any kind of shared conception of basic truths. By the way, his homily was fantastic. Why is zeal to be encouraged in these factions? Why is that to be encouraged?
Distracts. If you obsess over something like political stuff, you obsess over, you don't have time to read the Bible or pray.
Right.
It's almost like an overindulgence.
Yeah. The most important becomes relativized. The things that matter most. Misplaced priorities. We just read this a few weeks ago in 1 Corinthians. Paul is mentioning, you are mere babes if you say, I am of Paul, I am of Apollos, I am of Cephas, I am of Christ. Is Christ divided? Were you baptized in my name? No, right? It's Christ. Christ is the foundation. And yet, kind of arguments over whose baptism was better, or we see this, right, in many parts of the evangelical world, our separated brethren, right? When pastor leaves, then the church bleeds 30% of its members because the new guy's not nearly as good. And we see it. In the city of Montgomery. We've seen churches go from, one of the largest churches in the Southeast lost probably 70% of its members from the time we moved here. A church, I won't mention its name, but it's on Atlanta Highway. And I think it just left its denomination, right? Just because as Father Carucci said, when that man was going to be leaving, it was like, you don't want to replace that guy. He was well known in the city of Montgomery. He was one of the leaders in the denomination. It was like trying to replace Paul Bear Bryant. You don't want to replace Paul Bear Bryant. That's a hard one to replace. And we'll see how DeBoer does with replacing Saban. Keep losing to Vanderbilt, DeBoer. It's not going to go well. I got my priorities. So, all right. This one was significant, I thought, about the means and the ends kind of thing, to confuse those things. Why would Screwtape encourage Wormwood to make Christianity a means and the world a goal? What would that accomplish?
Well, I think it makes it short-sighted because the world is not the goal.
Right. The world is transient. It's changing. There was a great essay I read some years ago called "Making God Safe for Democracy." It's a great essay. See if I can find it. Making God Safe for Democracy. But basically, the point of the author was to say, it's from Claremont Review of Books, Making Christianity Safe for Democracy. And by a gentleman named John Shields. But basically, the gist of it was that kind of like what Archbishop Brody was saying today, the various isms that are out there, right? You can't, the idea, and the Archbishop hinted at it today, the idea that what we're up against is not a religion is a lie. The materialist out there, that's a religion. By golly, Jerry Coyne believes you don't have free will, and he is going to let you know, and he's going to proclaim it as Billy Graham would have proclaimed the gospel. He's going to evangelize you on the fact that you don't have free will. He does podcasts, he does everything, but the idea that they're just neutral, right? Like, oh, we're just the facts. We don't. And Archbishop Brody always points out, like, that's not true. There is a worldview being presented. They are trying to make converts. And so they're willing to accept our Christianity, provided it's safe for what they want. Making it safe, neutering it, if you will. So we'll take the bits that we like. So, for example, my friend David Anders made this point. It was a wonderful point. In Christianity, we talk about the virtues. And we talk about different ideas like justice, temperance, prudence, fortitude, faith, hope, love. And then of those various virtues, we have further virtues like humility and tolerance and what those mean. And so my friend David Anders made the comment when we were debating homosexual marriage, same-sex marriage. There was only one side that made a case that was a moral argument. The only side that made a moral argument about same-sex marriage was not the so-called traditional man and woman side. The only argument they made was constitutional. Guess which side made the argument based on morality? The redefinition of marriage crowd. They used the principle of tolerance, founded on justice. They just redefined what those words meant. But it was a moral argument. The best argument that the so-called traditional side came up with was, well, we don't find this in the Constitution. Oh, what does that sound like? Abortion, doesn't it? You hear people say, oh, we don't find it in abortion. The Constitution doesn't deal with abortion. And so we get into this whole idea about constitutional and unconstitutional and things like that. And so this basic gist of the article, Making Christianity Safe or God Safe for Democracy, is that we will accept a belief in God that is very generic and very therapeutic, but we certainly don't want a God that's like calling me to convert.
We don't want to be difficult.
We don't want it difficult, right? We don't want it, C.S. Lewis in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Tumnus, about meeting Aslan, and is it Lucy, or I think one of the girls says about meeting Aslan, and she says, "Is he safe?" And he says, "Safe? He isn't safe. Who said anything about being safe? But he's good. God is not safe, but he's good." So, any thoughts, observations, comments?
Feels like an uphill battle with society, like even for the kids. Like I worry that they're just gonna accept into the happy religion versus like just wanting things to be fun and good. And even when they're like, "Oh, mass is boring," I'm like, it doesn't have to be exciting. It's not a TV show. And how do I sometimes worry that it's just gonna become like maybe the devil is really winning in some of these areas of
Right.
trying to suck people in.
Right.
Which I mean, I guess comes back to what today, when he's praying rosary more than ever.
Right. Right. Exactly. Notice that the devil is not too concerned about the position that the patient adopts, right? He doesn't care whether he becomes a patriot or a pacifist. Just let him adopt one of these partisan spirits and then nurse him along the way, in which the religion becomes merely part of the cause, in which Christianity is valued chiefly because of the excellent arguments it can produce in favor of the British war effort or of pacifism. It's kind of like what we were saying. If we can bring God in to help us buttress our argument, so much the better. We don't really need him, but by golly, it really helps us if we could use. And I think we see that even in our culture. We see that in our culture.
Like sometimes, like in political, when people say like, "I'm a Christian" or whatever, but yet their policies and the things that they support aren't that.
Right.
So they're trying to win like.
Right. Right. One of the great tragedies in the church was, in 1967, when Paul VI wrote Humani Vitae, he was genuinely shocked by the public backlash, especially by clergy. And so George Weigel wrote an article on it called "The Uneasy Truce of Humani Vitae," and it kind of became this idea where, the church was reluctant now to get involved in any kind of matter sexual. And so what just came right down the road 6 years after Humani Vitae? Well, you had Roe v. Wade. And while that was happening, you had a gentleman who was a Jesuit priest named Robert Drinan, who served in Congress and was one of the biggest supporters of abortion legislation. And he gave cover to politicians to say, "Oh, no, not only can you be Catholic and support abortion, you can be a Catholic priest and support abortion. Oh, by the way, it's a violation of canon law to be right.
Be like,
Yeah, well, it was one of those things where it's the uneasy truce that Weigel wrote about. Is the uneasy truce? There was an argument. Well, where's the article? Uneasy truce of 1960 of Humani Vitae. But anyway, that's always the struggle. Yep, the Truce of '68 revisited. That's what they call it. It's in various articles: Notre Dame Church Life Journal, Crisis Magazine, First Things, all had that article. The Uneasy Truce of Humani Vitae. So anyway, I think number 6 is kind of the same idea. All right, letter 8. Another great letter. I find myself saying that every time I read them. This is a really good one. Letter 7, I think, will be my favorite, though. I like that one. So letter 8. According to Screwtape, we humans are amphibians, half spirit and half animals. Oh, I love that line. The enemy's determination to produce such a revolting hybrid was one of the things that determined our father to withdraw his support from him. Human beings are body and soul, right? We're not a body with a soul. We're not a soul with a body. We're not, as Plato said, and Calvin, could you believe this? Calvin echoed, the body is the prison house of the soul. Like, that's not what we believe. Oh, the soul's the more special part of us and the body's just an afterthought. Like, no, we're body and soul. The body reveals something about being God's image. The soul reveals something about God's image. And human beings have to be understood as being human beings that are not merely material, thus no soul, or just the real part of us is the soul, thus it's a kind of a Gnosticism. And so then the body's an afterthought and you could do whatever you will with it or whatever. So any thoughts there about that one?
It benefits the devil that we are body as well as spirit, because then he can tempt us through our passions, through our, even though it says here, this means that while their spirit can be directed to an eternal object, their bodies, passions, and imaginations are in continual change. What being in time needs to change, like
Right.
easily be kind of like wooed from different
Yes.
things and being just struggling in that struggle. Like, oh, I want to follow you, God, but I keep messing up. And,
Right. Right. And I think that's one of the reasons why a moral formation is essential. And listen,
Yeah.
I don't say this in any way to disparage other schools, but if you're not being formed in an education that grounds you in a moral worldview, then you have reduced education merely to informational acquisition, and you have reduced the human person to that merely of the body, the temporal. Those are the things that matter most. And you lose out on the deeper questions of life. I mean, look, for example, take like a letter from a Birmingham jail, which I use that one because I talk about it a lot and I spend a while on it. And that letter, and anybody who listening out there, read it. He quotes Augustine. He quotes Aquinas. He quotes natural law. He goes through a whole history of philosophy in a 8-page letter that he wrote from a prison cell in 1963. Father Joseph was in class the other day and was reading it, and he was just looking at it, and he was like awed by it. And I said, oh, he goes, wow, they're actually reading this in class. I said, yeah, we'll spend a lot of time on it. And he goes, I just can't imagine something like this being written today. He said, certainly not publicly. I said, you're right. I said, did you ever read it in school? And he said, no. And he went to Auburn, one of the top public schools in the state. He said, the only time I ever came across it was I had heard about it, but in an AP language class, AP, like, kind of speech or whatever class that they had. And how do you think they read it? They read a portion of it. And instead of reading it to understand it on its arguments, they read it to dissect it and analyze it like they were doing an autopsy. And that passes for education. And that's not education. That's technocratic acquisition. That's not what you do. It's like, it's like when you read the book Night, and then about the Holocaust, and like these are real questions that come from it. And you get educators who will defend this and say, oh, no, it's really what you got to do. It's like, no, that's not what you do. You read Night, and then you get a worksheet on it, and it says, why did the author use this adjective in this conjunction with the story that he was telling? He's talking about human beings put into ovens to be burned and incinerated. We don't dissect this for its adjectival purposes. And yet that's what passes. And it's like, well, like, no, you have to enter into it, reflect on it, analyze it. Why does Wiesel talk about the things that he does? But I think that's what happens when you reduce the human person to just a temporal being. I think education has to go that way.
Art they did a lot. Like they would use, like God would be taken out of the artwork, even though
Yes.
it's really a piece on God and depicting like Jesus or a saint. It was just God's. It was just the way it was painted, and it was like nothing referencing spiritual aspects.
Right. God gets eclipsed. What Benedict XVI called, and Archbishop Brody has called, the eclipse of God. The eclipse of God. How might this insight into human nature be helpful for understanding your own life experiences and right responses to God? Chris, I think you touched on it when you talked about, with the devil. Because of our fallen nature and the fact that we have a body, the devil knows the buttons to push.
And like you said, we need to know our faith better, our morality better, to be able to fight it. Because if you don't, if you buy the lie that a man can have a baby, then how are you ever going to fight the devil if you believe those lies?
Right.
If you believe what's out there, those lies, rather than the reality, the truth that there's men, there's women.
Right.
XXXY, So I think when people really understand truth, then they can see the lies for what they really are. But if they don't understand truth, then everything's true.
Right.
Or anything can be true.
And the body is, St. Thomas Aquinas says that the body, the senses, is the first means by which the body and the soul communicate, right? So the soul is able to apprehend concepts because first it passes, if you will, through the body. So think about how a child learns. The child first learns, not necessarily because the child is cognitively processing. The child's learning through the senses. Oh, this thing that's orange and blue, that's really attractive. I want to touch it. Oops, I'll never do that again, right? Fire. Get it? Now, of course, we don't let them touch the fire because they're not, but you get the idea, right? They learn those things, not conceptually, but they learn them tangibly, right? But then it passes, if you will, into the soul. And so St. Thomas talks about that. And so the faculties of the soul, what are the properties of the soul? The passions, the intellect, and the will. And so if you don't have a moral formation, then basically you're just led with the passions in many ways, right? So the passions have to be chastised by the intellect so that the will can make an informed decision.
A lot of repetition is also important. Like when we pray more, like these prayers, like with the kids, like versus just talking always about, like, yes, we know that, the teachings of the church, but just repeatedly praying builds in us those habits like that we had talked about in some of the other chapters. And I think it's kind of like how we can offset those passions is kind of having that discipline. Because I don't necessarily feel like knowing my faith as a Protestant helped me to grow in my spirituality. It was actually praying more as a Catholic, praying the rosary. I felt like
Right.
it actually deepened it, going to adoration, things like that. Like, yes, it's a twofold, like, knowing the faith, but then also just going to church and praying.
Right.
Having that
The
repetition.
habit of
Like
doing
Hebrews,
it.
I think talks about like repeatedly praying.
Right. Yeah. No, the constant habit of doing it, even when you don't feel like doing it. I'm going to do this.
And then when you don't, after the habit has been developed, you feel like something's missing. You
Right.
don't.
You recognize it.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So the letter starts out and there's that great word, undulation. Undulation. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like this up and down undulation. And so God uses the lows of our spiritual experience as means to do deep work in our souls. How have the lows in your own life been used to enhance your connection with God?
I think we forget that life is going to be a lot more hard than fun and easy. Because like a lot of the times when I was younger, I used to think, oh, it's going to always be fun as long as I get the hang of ABC, X, Y, Z, whatever. But realizing that no, most of the time it's going to be difficult
To grind.
to maintain, and that it is work to be close to God.
Right.
And we're going to feel a lot of dryness, just not feeling.
I inform my students it only gets worse from here.
Those poor kids.
See, now at your age, kids, you can't wait to get a piece of mail when you go home because that means you got a package from Amazon. But when you get to be my age, you don't want any mail because the bills that paid for that thing from Amazon just came due.
I think when the lows is kind of when you can realize you need for God.
Amen.
Absolutely. I was just thinking that. My first marriage, he passed away. That's why I got remarried. I'm not divorced. Anyway, my first husband was an alcoholic, and it was,
Which one of us do you love more?
so he,
I guess I'm this class, right?
I'm having tutorials later, Chuck. So you can stay. Where's your note? Hey, you were praying the rosary, holding us up.
So anyway, I learned that about the lows back when I was married to an alcoholic. He was a wonderful person, very good man, but he had a drinking problem. And I was trying everything in my own power, like, how can I fix him? How can I fix this problem? I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna make him not, like, there was nothing I could do. I could do nothing to change it because the person has to change themselves. They have to want to give it up or not drink or, find a better way. And it was that challenge that I kept realizing I can't do anything. Oh my gosh, I cannot change this. I cannot change it. I can't fix it. I can't stop it. And that's when I realized, oh, I just gotta go to God because I don't have anywhere else to go because my stuff ain't working. What I'm doing, isn't working. And so I knew that all I had was God. And
Right.
that's one of the times when I realized, oh my gosh, like I have nothing to do, God. Maybe He wanted me to realize that. Maybe we all need to come to a moment where we realize, I can't go to a friend, I can't go to a sister, I can't go to mom, I can't throw the beer away, I can't do anything to change this except go to the Lord.
Todd Sylvester, he has a great line, and I love it, and I've kind of adopted it as my own. It's like, when we find ourselves in a situation and we say, oh, well, all we could do now is pray. And Todd's line is always, that's all we ever could really do. Because that attitude is almost like, well, we've tried everything on our own, and boy, it would have been great if we could have fixed it, but now we're screwed, and now, well, help us. It's like, no, Todd's approach is right. All you ever really could do was pray, and it's like the story of the man. I heard the story of the man who was terminal, got a diagnosis that he was terminal, had a couple months to live or 6 months to live, and I don't know if the story is true or not, but it kind of fits in with the man has a friend of his. Oh my gosh, so sad to hear this news. What does it feel like to live knowing that you're terminal? And the man said something along the lines of, well, it's freeing because I know something that you don't know about yourself. You're also terminal. And we are. All of us here are terminal. We just don't know it, right? We live that lie to think like, oh no, we've got it all figured out, and we're going to have this long life and whatever that means. And it's like, no, we are mortal, right? Lord, teach me to number my days aright that I might gain wisdom of heart. Psalm 90. And so it's during those times of tribulation and suffering and struggle, that we come to that deeper experience with Jesus Christ and him crucified. Isn't that true? Amen. Yeah. Right. And again, another comment that Lewis makes, right? God shouts in our pain, right? In another work, he says that, right? The problem of pain. God shouts in our pain, right? Screwtape says, God cannot ravish, which is such an interesting, right? God cannot ravish. Only woo. What does that mean?
To woo someone
Yeah.
is to patiently convince them, patiently interest them in seeing and conforming, to what you want them to be like, or what you would want to see them become as a result of your patience and a result of your love of them.
Right.
Especially when you woo a woman, nobody does that anymore. It's all they're on TikTok. But back in the day when I was doing it, we used to woo the women. We used to romance them. We actually took time to get to know
Right.
them, before we I don't know what they do today, hook up or whatever they do.
Right.
But that's where the woo came in. You wooed them. You tried to convince them that you were very interested in them, and that you thought highly of them, and that you appreciated their beauty or their whatever gifts they had. And God does that to us too. He
Right.
moves us into the kingdom.
And I love Jeremiah talks about that. The Lord wooed Israel, right? He wooed Israel, and he brought them along. He wooed them into the wilderness, right? And he spoke tenderly to them. I love how you said that, right? Patiently trying to win over. And I love what Lewis says, because God does not strip us of our free will. He explains what he means, and I think he cannot ravish, he can only woo. For his ignoble idea is to eat the cake and have it. The creatures are to be one with him, but yet themselves. Merely to cancel them or assimilate them will not serve. He is prepared to do a little overriding at the beginning. He will set them off with the communications of his presence, which, though faint, seem great to them, with emotional sweetness and easy conquest over temptation. Archbishop Sheen talks about how in the beginning of the wooing, to use the words of Lewis, God will, if you will, throw candy or spiritual candy our way. So, for example, let's pretend you went on a Cursillo or one of those weekends. And so you come back and you are just on a high. It's the greatest thing in the world. And so you come back to Monday, there's adoration at the church, daily mass, whatever, and you go. and you feel tangibly his presence, right? That would be an example of God's candy. Like you're on cloud nine. Like, I can't believe wow, where has this been my whole life? The faith is the greatest thing in the world. God is there. He's with me. Every time you seem to be reading the Bible, you have this insight. Sheen calls it God's candy. And it makes sense because all of us as parents know, okay, that in terms of with kids, when we're trying to get them to potty train, for example, what do? We woo them. We give them an incentive, right? M&Ms, whatever, something. Oh, and they're enticed. And God entices us with these consolations, as he says.
It says in my annotations here.
Right.
God has made it a rule for himself that he won't alter people's character by force. He can and will alter them, but only if the people will let him. In that way, he has really and truly limited his power. He would rather have a world of free beings with all its risks than a world of people who did right like machines because they couldn't do anything else.
Right. Father Mike Schmitz has I have not seen the talk, but I was looking up some research on this to talk about the dark night of the soul. And apparently he's got a good explanation on the dark night of the soul and the dark night of the senses of St. St. John of the Cross. My bad. I've got St. Teresa of Avila on my brain because that's our feast day next week. So he talks about the consolations. Then he says sooner or later he withdraws, if not in fact, at least from their conscious experience, all those supports and incentives. And again, as parents, we withdraw those consolations of the candy, right? If a 7-year-old is still getting candy to go potty, there's a problem. Okay? Maybe we push it out. Maybe we, as our pediatrician said, God rest his soul, many years ago, when one of our children was having a problem with the process, don't worry about it. He'll figure it out. I have not met an 18-year-old who hasn't done it well yet. What's going on? You know? He leaves the creature to stand up on its own legs, to carry out from the will alone duties which have lost all relish. That's what we were saying before. I don't feel like I'm getting anything from church. That's when game is on. It's easy to go to church when you feel his presence all around you. But what about when you feel nothing? When is that love deepened?
I think that's what I witnessed when I left Catholicism for a while and was Protestant. I kind of experienced it and witnessed that if people weren't feeling it, maybe, at that church, maybe after a year or two, they might switch to another church, and I noticed that it was like this church hopping thing that goes on. And they might just follow maybe a pastor, or they just don't like what's being said or whatever. And I think that's a perfect example of where, as a Catholic, if you're devoted to the Catholic faith, you're not going to really hop from, Catholic church to Protestant to Catholic to, you're going to probably say Catholic. Most people do.
Right.
Even if you don't feel excited anymore because it's true. If you know it's true, you know what really matters. And I think, unfortunately, some people just church hop because they're still looking for that excitement.
Yeah.
I want to hear from a pastor that's exciting and fun on the stage.
Cutting edge.
Yeah. Modern and cool, and they have the good music and the rock and the videos, They're waiting, they want, what is it? Something about getting their ears tickled?
Yep. Itching ears, right. They want their ears tickled, right. No, you're 100% right.
So,
a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Mother Teresa and how Mother Teresa had to push through the absence of God in her life. Come Be My Light is the collection of letters. She felt nothing, and yet she loved anyway. She did not experience the consolation, and she loved anyway. And that's what he says here. Incredible insight right? It is during such trough periods, the lows, much more than during the peak periods. And the trough and the peak in medicine is the balancing out, by the way. Much more during the peak periods that it is growing into the sort of creature he wants it to be. Hence, the prayers offered in the state of dryness are those that please him best. The prayers offered in the state of dryness are those which please him best.
And that's what we said a couple of weeks ago. The best time to pray is when we don't feel like praying.
Yeah,
We don't want to pray.
right,
But you gotta break through. You gotta press through until you feel, you know that God's, I'm sure that God's listening to you. You can do it. It's possible to do that. And it's hard because you have the flesh. The flesh is weak.
right.
The
The
spirit,
passions,
the
right,
flesh is weak.
right,
It doesn't want to. It doesn't want to. Confess, or it doesn't want to pour open its heart to God. They just don't feel like doing it
right,
for what 1,000 reasons.
right,
But that's when God is really listening.
right, right,
I love what he says here. He said that, as you just said, during these trial periods, which or the periods that it is where the growing takes place. So, and he wants it to make in the sort of creature he wants it to be, which is that disgusting duplication of himself, is what he
right.
said earlier. He really wants to fill a whole universe without loathsome little replicas of himself. I like his statement when he says that. And he said, "But we want cattle that can become food. He wants servants that he can finally become and call them his sons."
Right.
I like that. That's a beautiful thought that he put in place there, because how beautiful it is, to know that God is basically cheering for us to come on and be, break through, come on and be my son, be the real son that I know you can be. Don't succumb to all your passions and desires, but stay the course.
Yeah.
Stay the course.
Right.
And I'll be right there. I'll be with you the whole way.
Right. Right.
God says that to God, to do this, Wormwood says, God cannot use his powers to wow us, but rather he wants to woo us.
Right.
He withholds his power and his what he's able to do. He's able to perform miracles upon miracles that would really wow. But that's not the point. That's not the point. He wants us to love us without all those powers that he can display. Jesus did it numerous times.
Yeah.
In the Gospels, if you read some of the Gospels, he did it. He did it with his disciples, and he actually did it with the crowds, as well. Even though he did finally, he would perform a miracle like feeding of the 5,000 of fish and others. But he asked them first, "What do we have? What do you have to offer? What do you got to work with?"
Right.
And he waited to see what they would say. And then he would allow them to either express their faith or express their doubt.
Right.
And
Right.
he would show them that anything is possible if you're with me.
Yep.
You stick with me, it's possible to be
Right.
greater than.
He doesn't override our free will. He works with
Beautiful.
our free will. He works. That's where grace comes in, right? We're free to accept or reject. And Father's Saturday morning homily, you touched on that in your Saturday morning homily about God wants everyone to have relationship with him, but in many ways it's up to me to say yes to that. That's what you were saying Saturday. So think about it and pray with it. That's what I love that. I love that. I love that. I love that. So, all right. So, all right. Well, fresh insights. I think being aware of what we were saying before of how he works, right? So if we're kind of feeling down and feeling like we can't get out of our own way, Well, just know that you're not alone. You're not on your own, and that while what you're going through is real, you also know that with the Lord you can persevere. You can come through this and carry your cross. Anybody have thoughts as we wrap up? All right. Well, as we wrap up, Father, I ask Father to close us in prayer and give us a blessing, and pray for Meals to Missions as we wrap up our campaign. Just got an email. We're going to give 10,000 meals to North Carolina, so that's really awesome.
Wow.
So
that's great.
So we're having the collection Sunday, right? And it's gonna.
Yeah, that's going to be one we're doing for the diocese.
That's for the diocese. Oh,
This is one that we're doing. It's for Montgomery Catholic, called Meals to Mission.
Do we
So
have a contact there that's gonna take care of that? And how the meal's gonna get there? Is there a point of contact?
yeah, there will be a point of contact. This group runs south through the southeast and whatnot. We've already raised about 27,000 meals. Our goal is 30,000 meals. So we'll probably hit it eventually. But of those meals, 10,000 are going to go right to North Carolina. 2,000 will stay in Montgomery, and then 18,000 will go to Ghana. So.
Let's pray that also that we won't have to repeat it in Florida.
Oh, I know.
After Thursday.
Yeah. Definite prayers.
What's the name of it?
Milton.
Yeah, it's bigger and
It's
badder
massive.
than the other one.
It right now is a category 5, which is the highest. They think it'll go down, but regardless, if it hits at a 3 or a 4, it's still.
Thursday morning?
It seems that way.
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, unreal.
That's a big one.
And like you said, Sarah, the storm surge, and definitely for your friends. So, all right, Father, would you give us your blessing as you close us with prayer? Holy Spirit, amen. Remember, most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known who anyone who fled to your protection, implored your help, or sought your intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly to you, O Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To you do we come. Before you we stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in your mercy, hear and answer us. Amen. And with your Spirit. Amen. Thanks be to God. There we go.